It's a few minutes after 7, so we'll get going and see if we can get things going. Thank you all for coming. My name is Barbara Cooper, and I am the chair of the Fidalgo Democrats. Welcome, and glad to see everyone. If you are not on our mailing list, be sure to sign in the back with your name, email, and phone number. And even if you are, we on our list, if you'd like to sign in, that's great. That way we know who's here. And before we go any further, I'm going to remind everybody to turn off your cell phones. And just some housekeeping. The front door of the library is locked. It cannot be used. That's why we're using the side doors. The bathroom is, if you go out that door and you make a left, there's the men and women's bathrooms there. There are cookies in the back, and they're absolutely wonderful. They're made by Rita Sullivan, and we have some coffee and some tea as well, if anybody wants, and some hot chocolate. And I'm going to explain a little about the Fidalgo Democrats. We're an independent democratic association with a focus on education. I'd like to remind everyone that we are not a PAC. We cannot endorse candidates or contribute to their campaigns. We don't charge dues, but we do pass the hat at some point, and thank you for your contribution and support. We use the money to buy coffee and to help with people who help us out at the meeting. Before we start, I'd like to start the meeting with an acknowledgement. We, the Fidalgo Democrats, acknowledge that we gather on indigenous land, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Samish and Swinomish people, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, June 13th, and Lyndon Jordan and Anastasia Brenchick will be joining us. The focus of the meeting is the LGBTQ community and how we can support them. And we'll have more details, and keep an eye on your email. You'll get a flyer closer to when the meeting is. You'll get a couple of flyers in the mail, in your email. And before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to ask if we have any elected officials from the Democratic Party, including PCOs, or any city council members, or any other elected folks here tonight. Okay, nobody's raising their hands, so if you're here, you're not going to be recognized unless you raise your hand.
She raised her hand before I did.
Rita and Valit, I know, are both PCOs. Okay, that's it. And I'm going to make some thank yous. Don Ambrose edits the Skagit Democratic newsletter, and he does a fabulous job of putting all kinds of information in that. I really recommend people sign up. There's in the back of there's a back table there, and Valit has put on a lot of information both on the candidates, about the newsletter, and so if you'd like to see what's back there at some point, it's really worth looking at, and it's really worth getting that newsletter. The other newsletter that is the Whidbey Island newsletter, and Carol and Rick Tamler do that, and it's another very interesting newsletter if you're interested in that. Again, there's information on the back table from the Skagit Democrats. And I want you to know that Zane Butler is recording the meeting back there, and it'll be available on the YouTube channel. Rita will work with Zane to send it out a few days afterwards. And just to let you know, if you walk in front of the camera, you'll be on camera. It's a pretty straightforward camera, so just be aware of that. So you might want to bend down when you go get cookies. Unless you like being on camera, which is fine too. The focus of the meeting tonight is the last legislative session. The legislators who are able to make it are going to educate us on what was accomplished, and they'll talk about future legislation and what they hope to accomplish. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each one by telling you what committees they're on. These are the most busy people imaginable. So I'll start with my list the way I have it written. Dave Paul, he's the deputy, look here, majority floor leader. He's the vice chair of the House Transportation Committee, Innovation, Community, and Economic Development, and Veterans and Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Committee. If I missed one, let me know. I got it from the website, so. Alex Bramall is the deputy majority whip. He's on the Transportation Committee, Finance Committee, Environmental and Energy Committee. And Clyde?
I'm the majority whip. Not deputy.
All right, see, I got it wrong. All right, thank you. Good. So, thank you. Clyde Shavers is the vice chair of the House Education Committee, Capital Budget Committee, Veterans Committee, Innovation, Community, and Economic Development. I'll talk about two of the folks that aren't here yet. I know that Deborah Lakanoff cannot make it. She's in California at a conference. But she is the vice chair of the House State Government and Tribal Relations Committee, the Appropriations Committee, Rural Development, Agricultural, and Natural Resources Committee. Our senator from the 40th is Liz Lovelet, and she's hoping that she's going to be able to make it a little bit later. So we'll see what happens. She is the vice chair of the Environmental, Energy, and Technology Committee. She's on the Housing and Local Government Committee, the Transportation Committee, and her adjunct committees, if that other stuff wasn't enough, was the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, the Joint Legislative Task Force on Water Supply, Natural Resources of State and Legislatures, Agricultural Task Force, and the Maritime Blue. So, with that said, I'm going to turn the meeting over to the three representatives here, and they can let us know what's going on. Let me give them the good mic. Okay. All right.
Well, thanks, Barbara. Thanks so much for having us. It's great to see everybody. It's great to see everybody in person. It's been a few years since I've been able to be at a Fidalgo Dems meeting in person. It's great to be back here in the library. So we have not really worked out how we're going to cover everything. I've got about 25 things that I was hoping to tell all of you about, but I also don't want to steal all of the thunder and good stuff from my colleagues that I work with. So maybe I'll just kind of start off with a couple of things, and we'll just kind of maybe up and down the row, rather than one long speech followed by another long speech. So I guess the first thing I would just always try to emphasize here is that our delegation of Democrats serving the northwest corner of Washington really tries to work together consistently. We meet on a regular basis to check in about budget priorities, and before we asked for those committee assignments, we were in collaboration with each other. And so we try and make sure that there's one of us on each of the budget committees, so that, you know, no matter whether we're talking about funding for the ferry system or funding for a library project, or funding for something in our appropriations budget like K-12 education or healthcare, regardless of what the priority is, there's always one of us in the room who can advocate on behalf of communities in Northwest Washington. We work together really consistently, and I think we work together really well. And we're really excited to have Clyde join the team this year. And then up in the 42nd District, north half of Bellingham and the rest of Whatcom County, we also had Joe Timmons join that team. So these three districts, 40th, 42nd, and the 10th, really do try and work together as a team. Was alluded to, this was my first year serving as the majority caucus whip. That is an interesting role. Happy to tell you more about fun stories over a beer sometime. But in short, what that really means is organizing the whole team to be there on the floor. It's a lot of taking attendance more than anything else. I also say sometimes it's like event planning, where you're at the same party everybody else is at, but you're thinking about what's happening in the kitchen, and you're worried about the people who haven't gotten there yet. Did they get the instructions to come? And so you have a different experience of the event than everybody else as you're trying to just kind of keep everything organized. But that position does afford me a little bit of perspective and a chance to be in the room for a lot of the leadership level decisions where we're talking about the really, oftentimes the not fun bills, but the complicated and difficult ones, and trying to sort through how we're going to move forward and whether we can move forward and whether we have the votes to move forward. And that, I like to think that being on this Northwest regional team and part of leadership means that our whole community is able to benefit from that vantage point. Turn it over to Paul.
Thanks, Alex. So Alex does a great job as whip, and there's other even less fun jobs involved with the whip that it's not all the exciting things that you might see on TV. But Alex has to deal with parking problems and room assignments and all kinds of things. So nice to see so many friendly faces. Nice to be back in person with Fidalgo Democrats. So I'm Dave Paul, if we haven't met, represent the 10th district with Clyde, and both the 10th and the 42nd really swing districts, where the 40th is solidly blue, and the 10th is one of the only 2 districts in the state that has bipartisan representation. So I take that seriously and try to work on a bipartisan fashion, but also try to make sure I'm promoting democratic values because I'm a Democrat and believe in those values. I'll say, piggyback on kind of committee work. So I've been on transportation for the last 5 years, and this year was my first year as vice chair of the transportation committee, and that is terrific to be able to help, especially on ferries. And I know ferries are really important in this community and to Whidbey Island and other parts of Puget Sound. And we've had a challenging 4 years or so with ferries. The legislature, for the first time, I think, over the last couple of years, has really taken that funding seriously. A lot of funding coming down the pipeline. We funded the building of 5 new vessels. We had some problems with actually getting those vessels out to bid, and so we did some policy work to help expand that bidding process. And we could have 2 different contracts, so we have vessels being built simultaneously with 2 different shipyards. That's a possibility coming out of this. In the meantime, we've got work to do to help with the maintenance and preservation of ferries, and really proud of the work where we dug in and looked at the staffing at the maintenance facility in Eagle Harbor and how we could add a second shift to that facility so that not only are we repairing boats quickly if they have a problem, but we're also doing the preventative maintenance to keep those vessels on the water. We only have 21 ferries with 19 routes right now, and of course Anacortes is suffering from that because of the lack of the Sydney run. But the only way we can get that back is to get more ferries built, and in the meantime we got to keep the existing 21 running. And then the last piece of that puzzle, or the last leg of that stool, is the workforce training and making sure we're recruiting a diverse workforce for our ferry system and trying to get young people into those positions. And had some innovative work with the Seattle Maritime Academy, which is in Ballard, really state-of-the-art facility that's underutilized. Ferries loves the facility, and so part of the budget process we have a proviso to help connect the ferry system to the Seattle Maritime Academy. And then I care a lot about education. I work at Skagit Valley College when I'm on the legislature. Did work on running START, which is a program that allows students to take college classes while they're still in high school. And Rita's granddaughters were on our campus and graduated with their associate's degree when they graduated from high school. And that now for the first time, we're going to have the opportunity to have summer running START classes. for high school students. Now that we've done work on that in college and high school, I'm going to be spending in the upcoming legislative session looking at the career and technical education. So folks that are taking welding or automotive or culinary, making sure that those students have a pathway right into those trade schools, community colleges, or apprenticeship programs, and able to earn credit while they're still in high school. I'll stop there, and I'm sure we've got questions and happy to answer other questions when we come up.
Thank you. So as a first-time legislator, I just want to say that, sorry, I'm Clyde Shavers, representing the 10th, position 1 with my seatmate here, Dave Paul. But yeah, as a first-time legislator, it's an honor to be part of such an amazing team here. Like Barbara said, we have chairs, we have vice chairs, we have caucus leadership, really representing Anacortes at every level within the State House. So the movement and the pressure points that we really kind of pursue, it's really coming out of here. And Dave Paul and I had a town hall in Island County last week, and I concluded with my appreciation for all of you for your continued engagement in the political process, your civic engagement, because I'm here, we're all here because of your support, because of your interest and your passion and in politics and what we do, and the shared values and interests that we all have. This session was quite interesting, and as a first-time legislator, again, it was quite hectic, but in a good way. I introduced 12 bills. 6 of the bills passed the House, and eventually 5 bills were signed into law. And so all of us have been bouncing back and forth between here and Olympia to kind of be part of this kind of picture and discussions with the governor as he signs these bills. But these bills range from support for military children in our schools to make sure that our schools are providing social and emotional support for those children, these military kids that move around a lot. Also bills that relate to, as vice chair, in terms of providing more opportunities for our young high school students. One of the bills that I'm very proud of that passed is ensuring that high school students receive financial education, some financial literacy, along with the flexibility to receive high school credit for paid work experience before or after school. Other bills that I'm really passionate about is providing more flexibility for our food banks to acquire non-food essential items like baby products or diapers or hygiene products. Because as we know, during the recession, families were struggling not just in essential foods, but also in many other areas as well. And another bill I'm very passionate about is relates to agriculture. The ability to really support our local farmers, our young individuals who want to be able to be part of this ecosystem of environmentalism, environmental protection. And Representative Dave Paul has been on the forefront of higher education. Representative Alex Ramel has been on the forefront of environment. And Representative Deborah Lacanoff has been on the forefront of salmon recovery. So again, the big working as a team on legislation, on priorities, and on budget items. And I'm just so proud to be really side by side with these colleagues to represent all your interests, to pursue the priorities that we all care about.
Thank you.
I've got a few other topics I could
Yeah,
talk about.
we have plenty of time, so if you'd like to go into a little more detail, that would be great.
Yep. So I'm just talking about a couple of sort of topic areas here. So I serve on the Energy and Environment Committee, as Clyde alluded to. That's sort of my day job as well, and so it's an area that I'm especially focused on. So I passed 2 bills. Clyde's got me beat by a lot. I got 2 bills through the legislature this year. One of them is a revision of the way that we tax renewable energy systems like wind farms and solar farms. So one of the problems that we're hearing when we go to build renewable energy, we know how to solve the climate crisis, by the way. We just have to build clean energy systems. But one of the problems we're running into is that in parts of Washington where there's a lot of wind and where there's more sun, there's folks saying, hey, we're not seeing an economic return to our community when these systems go in. And it's a complicated story of exactly why that doesn't work, but the answer is that we can fix it. And we can change the tax structure so that more of the money collected in those when we tax those renewable energy systems, goes back into the pockets of teachers in the local school district, to the tribes in the area, and to support local government services in the county. So we got that bill through. The other bill is, if you'll believe it, is even a little bit wonkier and focuses on how we provide energy for campus facilities like universities, like our prison campuses, and there's also private district energy systems. Decarbonizing those systems is more complicated than decarbonizing, say, a home or a small business, but it's doable. And we just need to plan ahead to do it, and we can do it. We now have legislation enacted that will get us there. This year, we also, related to the challenge I alluded to earlier, the legislature also passed important changes in the rules that govern how and where we site clean energy infrastructure. This is going to be one of the biggest challenges. If you follow the federal legislation around Inflation Reduction Act, after we put immense amounts of public resources towards building up the clean energy system, everybody in the clean energy world turned around and said, okay, now we can pay for it, but where are we going to put it? And that siting question for both where do we site the infrastructure, but also where do we set like wind farms and solar farms? Where do we put the transmission lines, and how do we get those permitted in a timely way so we can say, yes, there's going to be power lines to bring that clean energy from wherever we're producing it to where it needs to be used. So we passed important legislation there. This year was also the first year where the legislature had Climate Commitment Act funds to spend. So 2 years ago, we passed, I will say, nation-leading legislation called the Climate Commitment Act that puts a cap on carbon emissions and every year charges polluters for permits that fall under that cap. And that cap will decline over time, and the revenue from that permit auction will go into helping us implement solutions. And so because the first of those auctions happened at the beginning of this year, we were able to make huge investments in and commitments to things like helping folks transition to clean energy, renewable energy in their homes with heat pumps, weatherization and efficiency. Those programs are rolling out right now. We'll be able to make significant investments in areas where climate pollution is also leading to really serious problems with air quality. Areas like our ports and heavy trucking hubs, those kinds of things. So big investments in clean energy is going to be a center of Washington's economy in the coming years, and a real pathway forward that will show other parts of the country not only can it be done, but it's an economic driver, and we get better air quality and good jobs at the same time. So I'm really excited about that. We'll also just mention on housing policy, at the beginning of the year, we said this is going to be a housing year in Washington State. It's an absolute crisis. If you spent any time knocking on doors during the last election season, this is the number one thing that people were talking about. It's the number one, number two, and number three thing people were talking about. And whether that's somebody who's experienced a rent increase of several $100s that's driving them out of their apartment or the home that they've been renting, or whether it's somebody whose grandkids are living with them into their 20s because they're not able to find a place that's in their budget, or whether it's employers who can't hire people or who think they've hired somebody and then that person says, I want to move there, and they start looking for housing and realize that at that salary they're not going to be able to afford a place to live. It's a crisis in Washington State. If you look at the ratio of the number of homes to households, how many people are there and how many homes do we have? We're the worst in the nation. We're number 50. And that's not a crisis that was caused last year. This is something that we've been building towards, and we've got a lot of work to do to fix it. So what we said at the beginning of the year was our goal is to pass legislation that will increase housing supply. We need to build more homes, but that's not enough. We also need to make sure that we're stabilizing rent for the 40% of people in Washington who are renters, and we need subsidized housing for folks who the market rate housing is just never going to keep up for. So I'm happy to report that we got 2 of those 3 pieces done. And we're not giving up, and we're coming back next year. We passed missing middle housing legislation and some other important bills related to accessory dwelling units and permitting processes with local governments, aimed at making sure that we're able to build more homes in the places that already have services and where those home housing types and styles will tend to be more affordable. Things like row houses and townhomes that we used to build a lot of, and zoning regulations have made more and more and more difficult. So we're working towards solutions on that. We also put historic level of investment into our housing trust fund, $400 million. So that's state resources that match things like Anacortes has the home fund, paid for with local sales tax dollars. Bellingham has a housing levy. We can match those resources at the state level to support housing projects, permanent supportive housing, land trust housing, and everything in between to support all of the different rungs in the economic ladder. Unfortunately, we did not get the third piece of that puzzle completed this year. We had a bill, we had actually 3 or 4 different versions of the bill aimed at trying to address the rent stabilization crisis. I talked to so many people whose rent had gone up by double-digit percentages. 10%, 20%. I talked to a kid in his mid-20s who was packing to leave, whose rent had gone up by 50%, $1,200 to $1,800, 1 month to the next. He was packing to move out of our community, out of Bellingham. And that story is not unique. And what we know is that every time there's a $100 increase in average rents in a community, there's about a 9% increase in homelessness. Rent increases drive homelessness. And so we've got to figure out a way to tackle that. Building more homes will be a big step in that direction, but it's not going to solve it all on its own. So we've got more to do when we come back next year. That's housing.
So I'm going to steal Alex's cheat sheet. So I will say, in addition to housing last year, when we were knocking on doors, behavioral health and substance use disorder, mental health are big issues. And really, I'm looking at Kurt, who's worked with me knocking on doors over the last 5 years. Those have been major issues over the last 5 years. A lot of that, I think, our legislature focused a lot on workforce development, that we don't have enough folks in those fields to help everybody who's in need. And in addition to housing, workforce development was a major issue of the legislative session. And really every sector in our economy has a shortage of workers right now. So part of the problem we have with housing is there aren't enough folks to actually build the homes. It's not just a land issue, not just a lumber issue, but the labor side of things. So I think on behavioral health and mental health, we have really worked hard to help have innovative pathways into those fields, talking to folks to make sure that they understand if we have student loan forgiveness programs and public service loans forgiveness programs, and Representative Timmons from the 42nd helped build off our work last year, Pat Sullivan's work on having a state student loan program. And the challenges with behavioral health and mental health and substance use disorder also are we need more facilities, which our capital budget has done a good job of trying to to support over the last 5 years, but also the folks that actually staff those facilities. Like the housing crisis, those will not be solved overnight, but we're working to try to encourage more folks to go in those fields and talk, especially with young people understanding the importance of mental health in their community. There are jobs out there, and this is noble work to help folks that are in crisis and in need. Trying to encourage more folks to think about, you don't necessarily have to have a master's degree in order to do this work. So what is the appropriate credentialing that can help folks get into this work? Last thing I'll talk about on healthcare is work we did, where we've had challenges with the Nurse Compact, which allows folks that have a nursing license from another state to be able to practice in Washington State. They finally developed, I think, a compromise that kept everybody happy. I think that's really important for the 10th, because we have a lot of military spouses that come with a nursing license from another state, and this will allow more of them to be able to more quickly serve our community as a nurse.
Thank you. So I want to talk about reproductive justice, reproductive healthcare. So last year, this year, our team has been fighting to ensure that every person has access to reproductive health care, to ensure that there is reproductive justice. And I believe that we did that. We, with our growing majority, with a strong value-oriented mission, we really focused on that. So for example, we passed Representative Drew Hansen's SHIELD law, which ensures that those from other states or other areas wanting access to abortions or other reproductive health care, and providers, medical professionals who provide that they are protected from subpoenas, from other lawsuits, from other legal ramifications. I think it's very important. Washington State is on the forefront of that, and we are very proud to have passed that. Second, we're really proud to also ensure that there are abortion cost sharings occurring as well, to ensure that young adults have access to gender-affirming treatment, to ensure that individuals wanting to be able to have lower healthcare costs have the ability to actually pursue those through unique and innovative healthcare programs. So, I believe that as a team, we've really pushed forward that envelope, and we're not done yet. We're going to keep moving forward to make sure that we protect your rights. We protect your access to reproductive health care. Second, I want to also touch upon public safety, law enforcement. And this has been a tricky subject for all of us across Washington State. Certain areas are affected more in terms of the rise in crime. Other areas are experiencing retail theft, for example. And other areas across the state, we are trying to figure out how do we provide the rehabilitation and treatment for individuals suffering from drug abuse, for example. And so, as you may already know, our team will be returning to Olympia next week to further collaborate and find the solution to the Blake decision. And the good news is, all of us have been meeting with our counterparts consistently throughout the end of Sine Die, throughout the end of the session. So it's not like we took a break. We are working hard to make sure that when we show up at Olympia, we are ready to go. My belief, our belief, is that a fix to Blake needs to be as collaborative, as bipartisan as possible. And so that's what we're going to do in a couple of days, and I'm confident that we'll find that solution. Second, vehicle pursuits has been a major topic for the state. We understand that the difficulties and challenges that law enforcement professionals have faced in terms of ensuring that our communities are safe, that ensuring that they have the discretion to pursue suspects at a very, very tailored and targeted approach. And what I'm really most proud about our passage of the vehicle pursuit bill is that it ensures that there is this overhead, this supervision that must occur throughout any potential pursuit. So that means that at all levels of a police department, they are ensuring that, do we need to pursue? Is it required for us to pursue, or is it better for us to withhold this pursuit. I think by ensuring that we give the tools and resources to police professionals and law enforcement to do their job, but at the same time to ensure that they are held accountable to what they do, I think it really provides that necessary balance to ensure that our communities are safe.
I took a little break. I haven't cleaned my condo in 4 months. So I guess I would just, one thing I would add there that I think is particularly relevant here in Skagit County is, one of the challenges we've had with recruiting and mostly recruiting new police officers is that when somebody's hired, then they immediately have to go and spend a couple of months training in South King County. And if you've got kids, if you've got family, if you've got a home, it's a very difficult thing to add at the beginning of taking a new job. And certainly there's folks who are willing to do that. But there would be more people who would be willing to say yes to that job if you didn't have to go that far. And so some brilliant folks thought of that last year and said, why don't we have regional training facilities? And this year, we funded 3 of them, and we all worked together to advocate to make sure one of them is here in Mount Vernon. So we'll be able to support that. We talked to Anacortes Police Chief Floyd last summer, and this was right at the top of his wish list. Because this means when there's a vacancy and he's going out to hire, it's a much easier sell to say, hey, come work for us. Your training will be 30 minutes from here. That's a big win there. I guess the other thing I want to say is, 2 years ago, we did a lot of work on law enforcement accountability. And I think we made some important strides there. And I think we are continuing to try to find the right balance in how we approach this. And so that's something that we're going to keep working on. And that's, the pursuits bill in particular has been a little bit of a rebalancing there. Folks understand that we're not sort of turning back and saying, oh, pendulum swinging the other way. This is not a return to heavy-handed sort of tough on crime of the 1980s approach. So one piece of evidence that I'd cite there, and frankly, it's one of the things that is what I was most proud of getting done this year, was putting together the votes to be able to pass youth sentencing enhancement reform. So it makes sense that we have sentencing enhancements if you committed multiple crimes, multiple felonies, that subsequent ones are going to incur a more serious sentence. But I think it also makes sense that we acknowledge that, when we're kids, a lot of us make bad decisions. A lot of people make bad decisions. And we've been hearing for some time that it really does not make sense. It's not fair to have things that are part of a juvenile record be included in the sentencing enhancement. And there's a lot of people spending time in prison right now because of those sentencing enhancements related to things that they did when they were a kid. So we were able to make reforms in that system this year. And it's going to mean that we're able to get people back on the path to returning to and being part of society a little bit more quickly, and I think with a greater sense of fairness and justice. So that's one piece that I was especially proud of. Before we go to questions, we should probably also do at least a little bit on gun violence. Since Julia's here, I know she's going to ask that question. Do you want to?
Sure. Okay. So, this year we passed 1240. So the assault weapons ban. And as important that bill is, we passed another bill that will save more lives, which has a 10-day waiting period, and that barely passed, and all 3 of us voted for that. It would not have passed without our votes. We got a lot of work to do. I think that work is going to be really challenging because the things Washington State has already done, we're leading the nation, or we're one of the leaders in the nation. we need an assault weapons ban at the national level. But we got, the work that we have to do moving forward is just going to be even more challenging. We should celebrate the successes we've had to make our community safer, but we've got to address the sheer number of weapons in our community, the lack of trust that's causing people to think that they have to have weapons in their home. We're going to have to do a better job educating people about how that raises the likelihood that they're going to die from gun violence because they have guns in their home. It's really tough work that's going to happen. And it means that we're going to have to talk to folks that we don't necessarily always talk to in our own circles and have conversations to folks about this. It's just crazy. But I think that's what we're going to have to do as a community, as a nation.
I'm so glad.
Big stage. This is such an emotional and potent issue. There were a lot of people crying when we passed this legislation. When I first ran for office, my son was 17 at the time and had been, as kids do, had been in lots of drills in school about what happens with an active shooter. And I gave a veto. I'm not going to run for office if you don't support this. You're the priority here, but here's how it would work. The only thing he asked was that we try and fight this, scourge of gun violence. And that's been my commitment. My commitment to my constituents is one thing, but for me, that's a commitment to my kid too. Should we do questions?
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Thank you for talking about so many of the wonderful things that you've done and, starting a lot of the different issues that we have. I mean, it's a lot of work to be done, but thank you for at least starting it. What I'm going to do is, Candace is going to go around and have people raise their hand. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, and we'll bring the microphone to you. Please state your name, and I'm going to ask folks to stand up so we can actually hear. Also, use the mic around and see how it goes.
My name is Vince Allen, and this is my wife Gretchen, and we're both retired public school educators. And I spent 30 years in McConnell High School, and I went back last week for an event. Ran into a former student who happened to be teaching in my classroom, and she was really chagrined because Jada, the next teacher over, she said was an incredible English teacher with all kinds of awards, and yet she was being let go. As you, I'm sure, read about Mount Vernon and other places. Do you guys have any solutions, or perhaps better, any work scheduled on how you might deal with that?
Do you want me to take the first part? Yeah, so really, challenging environment for some of our school districts. I will say the pandemic has caused a loss of enrollment in some school districts. And then with the McCleary decision, so let me back up. The McCleary decision 5 or 6 years ago, the Supreme Court said that the paramount duty of the state is to fully fund our children's education. And that was good news. And something like 51 or 52% of the state's budget was devoted to education. There are a couple of areas that are not included in that. That includes special education, capital, the actual building of the schools, some of the supports like nurses and social workers are not included in that. So the legislature, in addition to funding that general education, this year focused a lot on special education and put in a record amount. I believe it's a record amount on special ed. We are trying to do some work to help with capital. There are some problems on the capital side. I think on the legislature and the federal government with the pandemic relief dollars really helped a lot of districts, and that federal funding has ended, and some of our districts have felt the pain of that. There is a rebasing to make sure that districts are funded equally every 5 years, and that unfortunately causes winners and losers. I think Anacortes was a winner. I think other districts in our community were not. The House had a smoothing out of that effect, which helped some of the districts, but I know I think Mount Vernon thought that they were going to have a well over $1 million cut. I think it was 1.6, and it ended up being a $1 million cut. That's not, I know that, so the state budget helped, but it's challenging when you are in those communities and they're having to make those decisions as we're trying to do the best we can with those scarce resources. Clyde, did you want to?
Thank you very much for the questions. This is a really personal question for me as Vice Chair of the House Education K through 12 Committee. My entire 4 months, I would say most of my effort was actually spent on fighting for ensuring that our teachers, our staff members, our schools are funded, that our students get the resources and tools they need. Bouncing off of special education, that was a difficult conversation. My fiance is a special ed teacher, K through 5. And so the one thing I wanted to make sure I bring home is that, hey, I'm supporting as much as I can special education. As you may already know, Washington State funds 13.6% approximately for special education at the cap. And we've been fighting to increase that cap. In the ideal world, the special education shouldn't have a cap. Every single child that has an IEP, every single child that has special needs should have the full resources that child should get. However, we raised the cap to, I think, 15 to 16%. And so it's progress. We're moving forward, and I'm confident that as Vice Chair for next session, we'll raise that cap. Well, I'm going to keep fighting to raise that cap, so one day, whether it's in 5 or 10 years, this conversation will no longer be relevant. Second, based on kind of rebasing the conversation from Dave Paul, regionalization has been a very tough subject as well. Regionalization, as a first-time legislator, it's very opaque. It's not very transparent. How does one school in one area get a certain regionalization factor versus another school? How do we clump different school districts with other school districts? Is it fair? Is it not fair? And as we saw, some school districts in our district, in the 10th, for example, lost out on money. And that means it directly affects the salaries of our teachers, and it also affects how students are successful. And so there was a letter that we signed on to, a robust letter that said, we need to relook how we do regionalization. We need to relook how we do education as a whole. And so we signed on to that letter. There will be a work group throughout the interim, throughout the session, to figure out how can we more fairly distribute the money, the funds from the state to all our schools based on the geographic characteristics and based on the student body themselves. And finally, in terms of capital investments, we understand that some areas across the state, they continue to fail on bonds, and they continue to fail on providing the necessary upgrades to school buildings. So for example, a student in Eastern Washington has a less chance of success or less resources than a student in Seattle or King County, for example. And what's amazing is that we have been really looking at it in a very unique and innovative way. For example, Senator Conway had a bill that utilized federal funds for schools that reside in military districts, military communities. So both of us live in Oak Harbor, And so we were very fortunate to pass this bill and to receive federal funds for early learning preschool as well as an elementary school that's suffering. And so we're continuing to look at how do we try to give the resources communities need, even though they fail on bonds or levies here and there. So it's a difficult subject. I know it's a long answer, but we're still fighting for it. We'll keep fighting for it.
First, Marie Ibsen, along the education line. Whenever I read about schools not having enough money, it's because enrollment is down. What's happening with those children? Where are they going? Is there anybody in Olympia looking at, have children moved out of state in these communities that the enrollment has dropped? Are they not being schooled? Where are they? I mean, I keep reading about it, but I have no idea what's happened.
Sure. Yeah, I can. So we've been assessing, recent developments on why schools are closing. For example, a few months ago, Bellevue, the city of Bellevue, had a school closure, or they were going through a school closure. Even in our district, South Whitby is struggling to can we merge, elementary and middle schools? Is it, more budget friendly? My belief, looking at the demographic changes as schools change, is that unaffordable housing affects almost everything. And so, for example, in South Whitby, the unaffordability of South Whitby has caused the population over there to be a little bit older, and so there are less students or less kids in South Whitby. Same thing with Bellevue. Bellevue is one of the areas that have one of the most unaffordable housing across the state, and so we're seeing this diversion of families with kids, school-age kids, into different school districts. And so, I wouldn't necessarily say, the school closure is a dramatic negative development. I think looking at the numbers, we have to be more intentional on how do we combat unaffordable housing to ensure that students can maintain their school districts and school teachers and school districts have the funding that's necessary.
My name is Don Gibson, the son. Okay. Lived in Anacortes since '93. There's a stigma out there, more or less, for kids that are in school, and I'm going to focus on the school part. Unless you go to college, you're nobody. And it demeans the people that not all students are academia. They're just not. God gives us all something that inside that we are good at, and you bring that out in that person, and the job satisfaction is more important than what if they have a blue collar or white collar. But there's plenty of good paying jobs out there and in demand for people that go to trade school and good money and all of that. So I think that there needs to be this, anybody that's not quite academic qualified to go to college, trade school, you're going to be, if that's where you want to go, you're going to be happy on your job. And if you're happy on your job, you're going to succeed a lot more. So there's a lot of connection to that. So.
Yeah, Don, you're singing to the choir. So first of all, the fact is most of us have 5 or 6 great careers in us, right? Most of us will do more than one type of job in our lifetime, and that's one of our challenges as we're talking to young people, is talking to them about that they've got great careers in them, and part of our job is to help them find what those careers are. So that means making sure you've got great opportunities to explore those when you're in K-12. And it's, sometimes it's very valuable information that if you try something and you hate it, that you learned it in 8th grade, or you learned it as a sophomore, you learned it as a senior that you don't want to do this, that's great. I really focus on, there are a lot of reasons you want to encourage folks to think about going to a university. We want to encourage everybody to think about that, but we also want to encourage everybody to think about the great jobs out there that don't require university training. And we have colleagues. We have a colleague whose partner graduated from college and then went in and I think became a carpenter and is a second or third year carpenter apprentice right now and loving it, that there are these great jobs out there that allow you to earn a family wage in your second year of apprenticeship program. And you know, our region has a great educational service district that helps support our K-12 schools. They had a great program earlier in the month where students could go to the carpenters facility in Burlington, and 6 different unions were there to show the skilled trades that the students could learn. And they did this rotation where they went, you know, got to drive got to use an excavator. They had a sim there to let folks scoop the dirt. They had folks pouring concrete. They had folks framing houses, so that folks, the hundreds of students over that week could see what those jobs were. What they had union journeymen there to help talk about those jobs. It really was an impressive show. And one of the things we can do as a legislature is help our K-12 partners have those resources so that they can show students what those are, make sure that we have the opportunity to take students on the bus to those programs. We know from the research that 70% of our students will need to have some sort of post-secondary credential, a 4-year university degree or a 2-year community college degree or a 1-year certificate, but something to be able to earn a family wage. And there are tens of thousands of jobs open right now, but require that credential. So part of our job as legislators is to help make sure our K-12 partners have those resources to help connect students to what those credentials are.
Add just one less well-informed addition to what Dave has to say. I would just say, you know, my experience, my vantage point on this, thinking about solving the climate crisis, talking to a lot of young people who are looking at that and saying, hey, that's what I want to dedicate my career to doing. And you might think you encourage folks in that position, young people planning their career, maybe you should be a scientist. It's not a scientist, it's not a politician. What we need most, electricians. If you know young people that want to make a difference for the climate, we need people ready to roll up their sleeves and just do the work of installing what we know we need to do. And by the way, pay better than being a scientist or a politician.
And I'll be really quick here. I'm really glad to be on this team because hearing your concerns, our team is dedicated to action, to actually producing results. So I was in Stanwood in Arlington a couple weeks ago, and one of the biggest concerns is that there's not enough healthcare workers, home care aides, caregivers, nurses, I mean, down the line, even down to sports medicine. So right now I'm talking with my policy team and my chair, Chair Santos, for education, and we're drafting a bill that expands the Core Plus program. The Core Plus program is a program that provides hands-on learning and certifications for high school students. Right now, Core Plus only deals with aerospace and manufacturing. And so this bill, which will be a very big bill, and I'm looking forward to passing it, is make sure that now we can have allied health in the Core Plus program, so that our students in high school and these skill centers, they can get certified as CNAs, as nurses, they can get certifications in home care aides, so that the moment they graduate, they can go help our senior citizens, go to hospitals and start their program. So, you know, we are dedicated to making sure that the moment they step out of high school, they're already ready to jump on the jobs that are needed.
Can I say one more thing? So, and then if we're doing that job right, we're making sure that that allied health professional has an opportunity to become a registered nurse, or a registered nurse has the opportunity to go to medical school if that's what they want to do. And we absolutely need electricians, like #1 priority right now. In solving climate crisis is electricians. But that we have the opportunity for folks, they may want to decide in 20 years that they want to manage that electrical business, that we have Bachelor of Applied Management programs that they can walk into, not have to start over and earn a 4-year degree, but they've already earned that 2-year degree in their apprenticeship program. Now they can walk in and get the second part of that degree and become a manager. Thank you. Great question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your input for the legislature. My name is Ron Rice. I've been a resident of the state of Washington since 1988. But anyway, my question, I'd like to change gears a little bit here, is about healthcare. And you mentioned that the people have access to healthcare in the state here, and I'd like to focus on mental health. People that are in mental health crisis. I don't know that they can pick up the telephone and call somebody. Could you expand on that a little bit if you would? And I'd like to know a little bit about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll start and then pass it off. Is that all right? So 2 years ago, I think we passed the 988 bill that has a dedicated number instead of 911, that if somebody's in a mental health crisis or they've got a family member or a friend in a mental health crisis, they can call that number 988. And we're going to have somebody there to answer the phone, so we got to make sure we got folks trained for that, but that we can have that person connected to a mental health expert or a provider quickly. We had some legislation this year that helped expand that to include other forms of mental health crisis intervention. That's going to go a long way, I think, to help with that. It also means that so it's really important that the difference there between the 911 operator and the 988 operator is that the 988 operator is specifically trained for that crisis prevention.
And so just kind of building on that, one of the important things, it's great to have that hotline and folks who are ready to answer it. We also need to make sure that the services are there on the other end so that when somebody is in crisis, that we have a place to take them. Ideally a place that isn't jail, because jail is expensive for taxpayers and not helpful for people who really need treatment. But we haven't had adequate bed space, and we haven't had a place consistently where folks can be dropped off where there's sufficient beds to take care of them. So last year, Skagit County opened the Regional Crisis Stabilization Center in Cedar Roy. There are, I believe, 16 beds there right now. We just got $12.7 million more in the capital budget this year. That's going to be paired with resources that Skagit County is sort of anteing up, and we'll be able to build another 32 beds at that facility so that we can meet the scale of the challenge. That's probably one of the biggest pieces. And then, at the other end of the spectrum, unfortunately, behavioral health, mental health isn't one consistent problem, right? But there are folks who are in the criminal justice system, in part because of their behavioral health. Western State Hospital has been our way of dealing with those folks. It is shameful that we are not able to take care of people who are in really desperate circumstances, and who we can never really let back out on the streets again, or might not be able to for a long time without a lot of treatment and care. But we owe, I think we owe other human beings better care than we've been able to give those folks. And I think we this year with legislation called responding to what's called the True Blood case, will put us on a path to having a consistent way to, in a timely way, evaluate those people and get them into the right track so that they can be cared for in a humane way. So those are some of the big pieces on mental health that we worked on this year.
Hi, I'm Julia Hurd, and I want to thank you for being here. And but to change subjects, I have a concern. It's not in our district, but about Hanford and the linking tanks there. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about that, or what you might have to say about that issue.
It's the Senate's fault.
Hey everybody, Liz Loveland. Thanks for taking me a little late today. So I'll just jump right in on your question about Hanford, because I think we talked about nuclear stuff at the town hall as well, really briefly. Or or at least there was a couple people who wanted to ask about that. And there's my mom. Hi, Mom. So what we have, a conclusion that we've come to recently as a state is our Department of Ecology has entered into a formal agreement with Department of Energy around those tanks that are not double-walled, that are at Hanford. So any of the tanks that are currently leaking, Department of Ecology, our Department of Ecology is entering into a contract phase with Department of Energy to contain those ones that are leaking. So that's the last thing I heard.
You want to take the next one too?
Yeah, sure. Hey, what do you got for me?
Hi, Kurt Huber. Thanks for making it, Liz.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to understand this special session and why we came to meet in a special session. And can you explain it so a simple guy like me can understand what the issue is and what you're hoping will come out of that?
I will do my best and bracket this with a lot of uncertainty because there's unanswered questions right now. But this relates to a Supreme Court case that was decided 2 years ago called the Blake decision. And the short version is that they concluded that our drug possession laws were not constitutional, and in fact hadn't been for the 30 years that they've been on the books. And so they essentially wiped the slate clean on that part of our drug laws. And the legislature, we were in the middle of session, it was remote session, it was COVID. Nobody anticipated this decision, so we kind of punted. We said, we're gonna make it a simple misdemeanor with some requirements for diversion towards drug treatment program. And kick the can down the road for 2 years, and we're gonna try to figure out a long-term solution. And basically, I think there's a range of opinions here, but most people would agree that rather than put people in jail for what is essentially a mental health problem, we would rather divert them towards mental health services, towards substance abuse recovery services. Certainly the people who've been in my life that have had these problems, that's what I want for them. And I think most people, when you know somebody and you love someone who's suffering from addiction, you want to see them get help. And I think that's what we ought to be trying to do as a state. And so this is sort of centered around what kinds of help can we offer, what kinds of help can we afford and scale up in time. And then there's this other piece of, well, if people don't want to go into that diversion route, what's the penalty? And so a lot of the penalty question is centered around the question of, should drug possession be a misdemeanor, 90 days in jail maximum, or a gross misdemeanor, up to a year in jail? In reality, people very rarely serve that full sentence. There's not room in our jails. Prosecutors aren't going to push that in most cases. But that's where a lot of the center of the discussion has been. We thought we had a deal that would put together substance abuse recovery and treatment, and paired that with a gross misdemeanor. Some of us were ready to vote for that, holding our nose for the gross misdemeanor because we want the recovery and all of the good that will come for people from that. Other folks were excited for, well, I will say that there's opposition on both sides. There were folks who thought the penalties weren't stiff enough, and there are folks who thought the penalties were too stiff. And the coalition of people who thought we hadn't quite gotten that sweet spot in the middle was a little bit bigger than the majority we needed to be able to pass it. So in fact, on the last day of session, on the second to last day of session, we thought we had a deal. On the last day of session, we did not have a deal. And so what was one of the biggest issues we were wrestling with, grappling with, we didn't have a path forward that we could get done that last day. And that's the cause for the special session. And so we're trying to bring, the intention right now is to come back. The governor has called a special session. I think we're mostly in agreement that that's the one thing we're going to deal with. and it'll be perhaps 1 day's worth of work, maybe 2 days worth of work for the legislature. Once that deal is formulated, we know the boundaries and the parameters of it, but that's essentially the question that we're dealing with. And I anticipate, I hope, that we'll have that deal. Because if we don't, what happens is Anacortes could come up with a local ordinance that says, well, it's going to be a gross misdemeanor here. And by the way, you don't get any of the diversion, any of the support recovery services. We don't get to help people recover. We just have one punishment here in Anacortes, and in Bellingham it might be a simple misdemeanor. And in Seattle, maybe it won't be anything. And you could cross a city boundary and have a different rule in a different place and not know it. So I think having one statewide policy makes sense. We just have to sort of figure out the right formulation to get there.
Do you know anything about the relative, excuse me, I'm Jen Steen. Do you know anything about the relative cost between incarceration and treatment?
I mean, the short version is it's a lot more expensive to incarcerate people than to help them recover. And I think most folks looking at this in the legislature acknowledge and recognize that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I just add, like a lot of things, we're in the in-between. Like, we know that we have to head in a different direction in terms of addressing substance abuse as a public health crisis rather than a criminal penalty, but we also don't have all the treatment beds built out across the state in a uniform way that makes that access point available for all Washingtonians. So we put record amounts of money in the budget into building out that substance abuse treatment network, into continuing to build out our 988 network for people that are suffering from mental health crisis, embedding social workers into police forces so that they know how to find treatment. So there's lots of work being done around that, but it's going to take some time to roll it out. And so really what we're trying to figure out is in this intervening time, what is going to have the best public health outcomes for folks so that they're getting the treatment that they need. Gentleman in the back.
Dan Baker. When I was in graduate school a long time ago, I worked at Eastern State Mental Hospital to pay my way through. They were in the process at the time of gutting all of the mental health throughout the state, all the social workers, all the people that worked with the police departments at the various cities to screen people to decide, oh, does this person go here or does they go there? They gutted all of that. And you guys know that. That's my question. That this is
sounds like the end of the Reagan era.
Yes.
And I just want to say how appreciative, how much this is an existential process that we're in here, a mess that we're in here. And I really want to thank you all and to Dave for sharing what you are experiencing in a very sensitive way. It's very challenging, aside from everything that you do as well. But very grateful and very honored to have you all represent us, and Liz as well. So.
Just brief response to that. Thank you so much for saying that. And I just want to put it back out to all of you and to all of the activists and organizers out there. When I first started this job, that felt like, my consultant was like, you should take a stand on this. And I was like, really? I don't know if I should do that. Maybe I plan to vote for it, but do I want to put it on my literature? I wouldn't miss putting it on my literature now. People want us to respond to that crisis. And that isn't because of something that we did. That's because of organizers who have been out there in the community saying things can be different and advocating for that change. And so thanks to everybody who has been part of that movement and showing up consistently to make it happen.
from Julia Hurd. Is she still here? Oh, there she is. Would you like to say something about your group?
Oh, gosh.
It's an opportunity.
It sure is. Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, I'm up on the steering committee for Safe and Sane Skagit, and we started in 2015, and we worked on gun violence prevention in Skagit County, and people may not know about us, but anyway, we are here. And we'll be tabling for Wear Orange in Edison, which is the first weekend in June, and to honor all gun violence victims of people who have been experienced gun violence and been affected by it, and also to educate people on the great successes that we are so, I mean, I can't even, we're like over the moon because of legislative successes from this last session. It's just astounding that we passed the assault weapons ban, and also the 10-day waiting period, and the training, and the ability to sue gun manufacturers, and on and on. And that's on top of all these other bills that have passed. But anyway, we are here, Safe and Sane Skagit. We're just starting to, we have a website that's going up, we have a Facebook page. I have a mailing list, and if anybody's interested, talk to me afterwards. Thank you.
Just wanted to point out that I live in the south end of Fidalgo, so I'm in the 10th LD. Been involved in Dave's campaign since his first one, and with Clyde this last year. And the state senator in the 10th is a Republican, and I think he voted against all of the gun control legislation. So if you want to find, you've got a great team in the 40th that's going to represent you on those issues. If you want a place to make a difference in 2024, get behind whoever the Democratic nominee is and running for that.
So I'm just going to say, this last time around, many people in this room worked really hard for the Senate chamber to get Sharon Shoemake elected in the 42nd, and they have not been all blue in something like 3 or 4 decades to have the full delegation come in as Democrats. We're in striking distance now in the 10th, and we're really going to need all hands on deck. I believe, as far as I know, all of us are running for re-election next year, so we'll have lots of opportunities for people to come in and help us out and make sure that we're there to be part of the team that helps elect people in the 10th and helps elect people in the 42nd, because that Democratic density really matters. In the Senate, for the longest time, it was Mazzal to the south, Wagoner to the east, and Erickson to the north. And I tell you, I was a lonely island trying to figure out how to represent all of the region when people didn't necessarily feel like they could go to their senator. So really excited for us to come together as a team once more in 2024 and make sure we get incredible Democrats elected up and down the ballot.
Hi, Laura Hamilton. Laura Hamilton from Anacortes. Liz, since you were here at the beginning, could you tell us a little bit about what you were proudest of in this last session? Because everybody else got a chance to.
Oh, thanks. Yes, I'd love to. You betcha. You betcha.
And also because you do live here, the ferry mess,
Which ferry?
The ferry.
Yeah, you want state or do you want county ferry? Because we got ferry messes all over.
Yeah, we do. We have several. But I was thinking about the Sydney run particularly. If you could give us, I read everything that is available about it, but I still don't really know what's happening. What's being done to solve this problem. And we depend on you to really help us with the ferries.
Yeah, that has been a really interesting voluntary position I didn't realize was so desperately needed and had so much work required. But I've been chairing the Ferry Legislator Caucus for the Senate. Dave Paul is my counterpart in the House, and Alex is instrumental in helping be there for all of those meetings for the ferry legislators. So the long and the short answer on the Sydney run is that, for one thing, it requires a different classification of boat. You have to have safety of life at sea certification, which is a whole different level of like HVAC and fire suppression and all of that. So we only have one boat in our entire WSF fleet that is SOLAS certified. And then right now we're at a place where we have just finally barely almost restored regular service on all of the runs up and down the Sound, and we don't have enough boats to have that Sydney run going at this point, unfortunately. Now, one of the things that's on the horizon that I'm excited about is that with Alex's help and Clyde, we were able to come up with a new procurement strategy for vessels. And so we have a lot of hope that we will be able to not only build incredible boats in Washington State, where we have a legacy of shipbuilding, but that we potentially might be building a couple of them out of state as well, so that we can put a big boon of boats into the system and get back to the levels of service that people want and need. So we changed the way our procurement process worked for that. We're still on the road, getting the pipeline of crew members to be there to fill all those positions, but that's kind of a long-term strategy. So our hope is, and we did put a little bit of money in the budget as well, to do a national search for potential boats we could lease to do the Sydney run, to see if there's some kind of public-private partnership we can enter into with some of the other private providers that are going up to Sydney. But the challenge is that car service piece, and so we'll continue to work on that. But just know that to say it's a disappointment is an understatement. We had just done all of that data crunching on the Sydney run, found out it was like our only money maker, and all of the economic impact that it had downstream for Anacortes and for the San Juans. But at the end of the day, for us to come and say, hey, Bremerton, we hope you don't mind only having one boat a day when, and that you can survive on that service. We need to do this, run up to Sydney that's a bitter pill for all those runs to swallow. And since we have to look at the system holistically. So fun things, exciting things about this session. This was the first year I chaired a committee. So my current assignments are I chair local government, land use, and tribal affairs. I continue to be vice chair of energy, environment, and technology. And like I said, I chair the Ferry Legislator Caucus on the Transportation Committee. So that intersection of housing and transportation and climate change is where I spend all of my time and policy work, because I think that's the blueprint for how we create the livable, walkable communities that we all want to have, so that we can live, work, play in the towns that we love. So some of the policies that I'm most proud of, we actually just had this really great bill signing down in Seattle yesterday for a bunch of housing bills that are to provide gentle density in our communities, so middle housing and ADUs. We want to be able to create smaller footprint units that infill into our neighborhoods in a way that matches the character and the design standards of our neighborhoods, but gives different types of units, options for people to live, for them to age in place, for them to potentially build a little small unit that they can live in, and they can rent out the other part to have an income. And then one of the other big bills I'm excited about, having been part of the team on that finally got passed this year, is 1181, which has all of our GMA planning cities and counties accounting for climate change in their comprehensive plans. So now we're talking sea level rise, we're talking about the resiliency of our infrastructure, we're talking about where people are developing houses near wildfires and floods, and really embedding that into our long-reaching planning documents. So that was all the fun stuff that came through my committee that I was super excited about. But for my personal bills, I just did 2 this year. One tasks the State Building Code Council to create definitions and occupancy standards for temporary shelters. So we want to be able to rapidly rehouse people and get them off the streets. Some of these temporary shelters provide exciting opportunities to do so, but we don't really know how long people should be in them. What's the snow weight load? What's the electrical? What's the setback to ensure that if one unit, if there's a fire in one unit, then it's not going to set fire to the remaining units. So that health and safety occupancy standards are going to be set by the Building Code Council, so that motivated jurisdictions can start rapidly rehousing folks that are experiencing homelessness. And then the other big bill, I'm so excited, my mom's coming down to Olympia with me. I finally get to have my family there for a bill signing, but we were able, through a lot of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, and incredible voter turnout in the House, we're able to get a 1,000-yard mandatory buffer from our native killer whales. They have been beleaguered by voters throughout all of this time, as they're essentially going extinct before our very eyes. And we've done a lot for salmon recovery, we've done a lot for reducing plastic particulates in the water, we've done a lot for habitat restoration. I had a bill last year that helped remediate 10,000 acres of kelp and eelgrass, but the one thing that we haven't tried is just leaving them alone. And I don't know, when I had a baby, the last thing I wanted was everybody and their brother coming up and trying to bear witness to that, and the whales are way more sensitive than we are to that sort of thing, so really excited to bring that forward. Yeah. So that's my, I guess, nutshell version, so thank you.
Hi, thanks. My name is Stan Dury, resident here in Anacortes, proudly now for 2.5 years.
Welcome.
Came here after 30 years in Pennsylvania, where I was very much involved in Democrat politics. My only regret in not being there in the last 2.5 years is I couldn't vote for my friends Josh Shapiro and John Fetterman and get them elected governor and senator. But anyway, early on, Alex, you mentioned the tax restructuring that was done to kind of
bridge the east-west over the Cascades Divide, regarding taxation for solar and wind and so forth. It is probably not a question that can really be answered, but that's one of the things I've learned about the state is, red versus blue and maybe some zones in purple. Any other thoughts about legislative activity that might be initiated to kind of further bridge that divide? I know there's the dam controversy and other things going on. Any thoughts on that subject?
Sure. So, the dam controversy, that's like a dam with a water behind it, is probably not one where it will be easy to find bipartisan compromise. I think we can solve individual problems that are raised, but I think ultimately, and that is not a decision that will be made by the Washington state government, that's a federal question. But to your broader question about sort of what can we do to find common ground. So the bill you mentioned, I've worked really hard to find a Republican co-sponsor. And once you get one, like, it's a lot easier, right? Several more signed on, and by the end, we got 80 plus votes out of the House, which means more than a dozen Republicans joined in supporting it. It's probably surprising to most people to learn that more than 90% of the bills that we pass are bipartisan in Washington state. I think it was 93% in the last session 2 years ago. It was higher than 90% last year. I assume when the tally's all done, it'll be similar again this year, if not more so. Most of the work that we do, and frankly, there's good governance reasons, but there's also just the practicality of if the Republicans hate a bill, they'll make it take forever for us to pass it, and we won't be able to get anything else done. And so it just goes a lot easier if you find things that you can compromise on and work together to find some common ground. And I didn't get that my first year in the legislature. I was mostly just counting votes and how do we get things passed. But that's something that I think a lot of us have, certainly I've grown in, I know others have learned to do more of. And I think this last year, we found a lot more common ground. I think the tone was different than in previous years. And I think part of that is just us being back together again in person. The co-sponsor of that renewable energy taxation bill, Mark Clicker, I thought he was a jerk, and I'm sure he thought I was a jerk for the last 2 years. And we'd never met in person. We've been on Zoom calls together, and that's not a good way to get to know somebody. And then we met in person, and he's just got a huge smile, and he's like, "How you doing? It's so good to be back." And just that smile was enough to get me to approach him with that bill idea. So, and I think on housing policy, we found a lot more common ground. I think that was true in the Senate as well. But there are other areas, and so there's a lot of areas where we find that common ground. Those things, oftentimes, I can't get a newspaper to publish an op-ed about that bill. They want to cover the controversial stuff, right? They want to talk about gun violence prevention, where it's, party line vote, or the one member who crosses over. Like, that's an interesting story. Everybody agrees there's a problem and we should solve it, and here's how. That's harder to get folks to pay attention to, but it's actually bulk of the work that we do, and I know that's not something most people believe when we say it, but it really is true.
Great, thanks.
I think previously mentioned, Representative Dave Paul and I, the 10th, represent the purplest district in Washington State. My race, we won by 216 votes. And so the issues that we talk about today, the backgrounds and values that we all experience, sometimes put people, different groups, in opposite sides of the corner. However, the fact that Representative Dave Paul and I are sitting here, to me, indicates that the 10th is shifting into not just a bluer district, but a more collaborative and cooperative district. And I think for me, as a first-time legislator, I'm building relationships for the first time, and equally important, building relationships in my own caucus with the Democrats is also reaching across the aisle and building relationships with Republicans. And the successes I found is that by understanding fundamental issue points or values that we share in common, then we can build up from that. And in my experience, agriculture has been one of those binding issues that I've been really able to find success in. So looking forward for next session, that's what I'm really focusing on. What are the agricultural building blocks that we can pursue? So a couple of weeks ago, I just filed and introduced a bill that would provide tax incentives for farmers to shift away from toxic pesticides into more environmentally friendly pesticides. So for me, that foundational agreement point is we need to support the environment and we need to support our farmers. So we can come together, Republicans and Democrats, to support this bill. Most recently, last session, I also introduced an agricultural bill that would have protected our local farmers as well as protected our environment by prohibiting the purchase of Washington state agricultural land by foreign entities and foreign governments. So it really helps young people, for example, young Democrats and young Republicans who want to get into agriculture, who care for the environment, that share our values, to really come together in these bills. So that's kind of how I'm finding these agreement points. And thankfully, I've only had 4 months to figure out agriculture is one of those building blocks. And I'm sure I'll find more and more, whether it's affordable housing or whether it's in small business support, those kind of issue points. I really think that Washington State is on the forefront of bipartisan cooperation and collaboration.
Are there any other questions? Good questions. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody in the audience, for your great questions, and thank you both, all 3 or 4 of you. Yeah, we're missing Dave, but for coming and sharing your information, your knowledge, and thank you for being the legislators that you are. We are so lucky in the 10th and the 40th to have you. I think I can speak for everybody in the audience. And I really appreciate that you're trying to be collaborative and get a lot of people on board on these wonderful, really important issues, rather than divisiveness and digging heels in for things. So thank you, thank you. Really appreciate the cookies, and Zane, thank you, and everyone for coming. I don't know if there's anything else. Is everyone feeling like they got their say? I hope so. And, okay.
Oh, Rita.
Oh, we have Rita.
Oh, the Fidalgo Democrats, the Skagit Democrats will be walking in the Pride Parade.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, that's in June. The 17th, and we will be doing that, and we'll be walking in the 4th of July parade as well.
Do you want to say anything about our next meeting?
Yeah, I did at the beginning, but I
Oh,
can.
you already did.
Okay. We're going to have a meeting on June 13th with Lyndon Jordan and Anastasia Brinchick, and the focus of the meeting is going to be the LGBTQ community and how we can support them. And Anastasia is also going to be talking about racism and divisiveness as well. Seems to kind of unfortunately tag on to that. So that will be our next meeting in June, and you'll get some notification of that.
Barbara?
Yes.
I just want to, I think we should all stand up and thank our representatives.
Yes, absolutely.